Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Scott Kid Poteet. Scott is the mission pilot for the upcoming Polaris Dawn mission set to launch this summer from the historic launch complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center. Kid is a retired U.S. Air Force lieutenant colonel who served 20 years in various roles to include in the Air Force Thunderbirds, Aggressors, Weapons School, and Operational Test. He's a husband, father of three teenagers, and has an extensive background in endurance sports to include 15 Ironman triathlon. Scott, welcome to the Future Space.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to join you today.
Can't wait to hear all the amazing work that you're doing right now with your team. But before we go there, could you share with us three words that capture the essence of space for you?
Three words that capture the essence of space. I would start off with respect. Respect is having deep admiration for someone or something. In this case, it's the vastness of space. And just like pioneers experienced generations ago when they set their sights on crossing oceans, exploring new continents, attempting new, never summited mountains, you got to have that healthy respect for those types of adventures and journeys and explorations, and space is certainly part of that. And similar to your solo wilderness expeditions, it takes extensive preparation, and a full comprehension of the circumstances in order to start having that respect for those types of challenges that you'll soon face. And because risk involved in a lot of things we do, and space is certainly one of those things. Second word I'd say is education. We have so much to learn. What's out there beyond the stars in our solar system, the information and data we gather from satellites, from telescopes like Hubble and Webb, great resources, and it's certainly opening our eyes to what's out there beyond the stars. But truly, it's a sliver, a glimpse of what there is to learn. And we need to start this journey to learn as much as we possibly can. But introspectively, education also involves understanding our own emotional intelligence. We got to manage our emotions and the stresses that we'll experience in these explorations in order to maintain those higher levels of situational awareness, which is something we always talk about in the fighter pilot community. Because again, it gets back to that level of risk that we're willing to accept to explore these stars. Because ultimately, I think, in my opinion, humans are going to be the limitation as we venture out here, and with longer duration space flights. And then lastly, I'd say determination. We have to maintain the momentum that you're starting to see in the space industry. Having the passion and inspiring the next generations, generation after generation, in order to advance the technologies that we're starting to see in order to explore. And something that we're used to, it's what's going on in SpaceX. Elon and Gwen are doing a pretty cool job, and certainly doing their part in space exploration with all the launches. And we saw one last night with Crew 6 heading to the ISS tonight. So there's a lot to learn and a lot to experience, and it's awesome just to be a part of that.
When you say respect, I've always said that wilderness was, for me, my connection and my explorations, my expeditions was always, it's exercise of humility, finding yourself in places where forces are bigger than you. Even though you can ride them, you can find a certain harmony within them, you're always left with the impression that you're just a tiny speck on the back of a giant. And yes, we keep pushing the boundaries, but every time that we push one boundary, we realize there's a bigger boundary. So that respect, the humility is always part of the experience. And I think that's one of the gifts of exploration, is that it brings us back to what living as a human being is, in the same way that going to the moon was looking back at Earth and really having this moment of realization of where we come from. You said that the second word was education, and obviously all the knowledge, but you brought this element of the emotion education. Do you think that it's actually something new, that now we're realizing that we're not just machines to be fed information, but there's a component that is extremely important, and it's the emotional benefit, the emotional education. Do you think that that's something new in our society?
I don't think it's necessarily something new. It certainly touches upon one of the characteristics, qualities that you just mentioned, humility. That's one quality I try to instill in my kids. I got 3 kids, and humility is a lacking characteristic in our society. We're so enamored with social media and perspectives of others and how we're viewed. And I think it's a quality that we've lost, and we need to instill in future generations, because we need to understand our limitations. And that's part of emotional intelligence, is being able to manage those emotions, manage stress, maintain those higher levels of situational awareness on what's going on and how we interact with one another. Something else I always try to teach my kids is never burn a bridge. Some of the things I've accomplished in life, it can root all the way back to experiences years and decades ago, that I was, I fostered a relationship with someone, and then on down the road that proved beneficial in opening a door for me to have some of these experiences. But the human mind is certainly a challenging beast for sure. And as I alluded to, I think, the more and more I get exposed to what's going on in the space industry and space exploration, and we talk about these long duration space flights, the human is going to be the limitation factor in all of this. It's an austere environment, and we need to understand how we're going to function. So it's certainly something that we need to explore more.
It reminded me of when I spent a lot of time doing my expeditions. Part of my creative process or exploration process was always first to connect with the local people, being hosted and finding myself at the table, staying with them and sharing a meal. Because in my mind, it was always arrogant of me to think that I could visit these places that I'd never been and capture their spirit, their energy. And what I wanted to do was more to hear their stories, connect with them, and through their eyes, through their stories, through their words, now get to learn what this place was about. And then they would tell me, oh, no, you got to go and see my friend or my uncle, and he's going to take you over there. But the biggest lesson that I discovered through all this process is that at that table, sharing a glass of wine and sharing a meal, we're all the same. We all strive for the same thing. We want to put food on the table. We want to send our kids to school. We want to have a certain value and purpose. Then after that, it gets complicated. But being exposed and taking the time to listen and to hear other people's story, we're all trying to navigate this world and accomplish the same thing. And there's, you're rising above that. When we talk often about going to space and looking back and yes, recognizing we all come from the same planet and there are no boundaries, there are no borders. I always feel like first we need to acknowledge that there are differences. We're 8 billion people on the planet, and there's 8 billion stories, and there's a lot of geographical borders, differences, but we need to understand our differences so that we can rise above them. Because in the future, when we're going to have people on the moon and on Mars, you're going to have these total different realities with different priorities and different goals. and we're all going to need to come at the table and try to work things out. But if we say that, oh no, we're all the same, it's like, no, that's going to be a little bit different. I think that it's part of the exercise of recognizing these different stories so that we can all come together and working in the environment that you do. I think that's one of the components, right?
Absolutely. And just to touch upon something you just said, listening. Again, back to my kids, they got 2 ears and one mouth, and they need to listen twice as much as they talk. And that's something that's just not taught. How to listen, how to hear, how to understand and comprehend what those stories are. Some people ask us, why do we do some of these higher risk type activities, climb mountains? We did Cotopaxi in preparation for our Polaris Dawn, the skydiving, the scuba diving, the centrifuge, the altitude chamber. All those are opportunities to kind of understand how we all interact, communicate, and work together as a crew under stressful situations, getting comfortable in uncomfortable scenarios. And there's only so much we can do here on Earth. Up there in space, there's no reset button. We can get in the simulator, we can go through scenarios, contingencies. If we screw up, it's like, okay, time out, guys. I screwed up this. Let's reset it. Let's try that again. We can't do that up there. And we're going for 5 days, on the ISS. They're 6 months, longest duration. We're talking just over a year. When we start venturing beyond the lunar surface, heading towards Mars, we're talking 8-9 months to get there, and the duration you're going to spend on the surface and then the return trip. That's a long time. You got to be able to understand how the human is going to adapt and accept some of those challenges that they're going to face. And the first step, and it gets to your point that you just made, it's understanding what those challenges are. And I don't think we fully understand what those challenges are. And that's why we've kind of focused our attention on the whole Polaris program as a developmental and operational type program to be able to identify some of those technological challenges as well as human challenges that we're all going to face with long duration spaceflight, and see how we can overcome them, or at least just simply understanding them. One of our primary pillars, we have 4 for our mission. One of them is the science and research. We did a solicitation, a request for proposals, and we selected 40 science and research experiments, and they all had to have elements of identifying some of those challenges that we're going to face, because we want to continue to move the needle and progress forward. So we have purpose in what we're doing in our simple 5-day mission.
I think that's part of the beauty of our species, is that we're able to create as we evolve and, want to do things better and better. Like, we're spending so much time now focusing on the human element, knowing that we have the science and the technology, but it's not just about that. It's about how can we enrich our lives as we move forward. And I think that's a great segue on the second question that I always start every interview with, is what do you think is the human story of going to space?
Oof. We've been at it for, 65 years or so, NASA. Starting off with the Mercury Project Mercury, and then Gemini. And then, a very short time after, we had the Apollo program onto the moon. And then kind of that second wave of with the shuttle missions, and now we're on into Falcon 9, eventually Starship, Starliner, and SLS. It's thankfully it continues to evolve as technology continues to improve and get better with the latest innovations. It's exciting to watch. It's exciting to be a part of in our very small little sliver of this experience in space exploration. My adventure started only a couple of years ago with space. I thought my ceiling was flying fighter jets. But I've been blessed with this opportunity to go to space, and over the last couple of years, working with SpaceX alongside in collaboration with initially the Inspiration 4 mission and now Polaris program. It's absolutely amazing what humans are able to develop. And we're a witness to that every time we go to SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne to train. There are 11,000 employees there, McGregor, Starbase, working 24/7 to advance our quest for space exploration. And nothing is more impressive. Again, what we're involved with Falcon 9. But when you go down to Starbase, I don't know if you've ever been down there, but we've had the privilege to go down a couple times. And each time we go, it's a new iteration of development and not only in the infrastructure, but in the production line, the high bays, the mega bays, the number of vehicles and boosters they generate. We were standing underneath the nose cone, and the volume in that nose cone is equivalent to ISS. And Elon's vision is to launch 3 of these a day, every day. And we were in the production bay, and there's just nose cone after nose cone in production. And all of those are eventually going to fly and go to space. And it's just mesmerizing, and it's exciting to watch. So we got a lot to look forward to in the coming chapters.
I believe that the hardship of life has a specific purpose of actually bringing us back to what matters and gives us the incentive to go outside of our comfort zone and come together or teamwork. You've been trained and you've spent a life in pushing the boundaries and learning how to cope with the stress so that you can accomplish better. Last year, we were talking at the beginning of the war. You and Jared went and delivered help and food, and now you're training to get to Polaris. Do you think that these hardships are a necessity for make us first of all more humble, but also for giving us the incentive to become more social rather than separated because we become too comfortable?
Absolutely. I think it's essential for growth. I think we get too comfortable sometimes, not taking risks. And maybe it was the level of experience I had flying fighter jets for 20 years. It becomes second nature. But when you do find yourself in some of these scenarios that are riskier than others, those are the times where introspectively you got to look at yourself and prioritize and figure out how to solve certain challenges. We all face challenges. Some are certainly setbacks and obstacles. We all face in life, whether they're financial, health related, life, family. You can address those and tackle them different ways. You can succumb and give up and raise your hands and let someone else figure them out, or you plow through the proverbial wall of misfortune and tackle these challenges head on. You certainly learn a lot about yourself, and there is a lot of growth that is to follow when you do have these experiences. How a lot of people ask me, how do you manage certain situations, whether they're contingencies, emergency procedures, or those higher risk scenarios? And I think a lot of it roots back to my experiences flying fighter jets and how I handled some of those scenarios in combat. And it's those basic skill sets that I've benefited from to get me kind of to where I'm at. And I'm very fortunate as well, just to have these opportunities.
So I think that part of that process is recognizing, like you were saying earlier, our limitations, our vulnerability, so that you can prepare yourself and compensate and be ready. And I think that in our society right now, I think we're drinking too high on thinking that we're so good at one thing, and then when we do find ourselves in these situations, we don't have the tools or the skills. We've forgotten to give ourselves the tools for communications and understanding, how different people are, as opposed to just kind of protect, like shelving ourselves away from the uncomfortableness of what it is to be human. And instead of showing up prepared, we're showing up lacking all the tools that are necessary to be actually good humans, right?
Mm-hmm. That's certainly something I've recognized in our training for Polaris Dawn. It is certainly a team effort, reliance upon the crew. Jared's an experienced astronaut with Inspiration 4. He knows the system. Besides being an extremely intelligent individual, he knows the systems that's in and out of the Dragon capsule. And then you have Anna and Sarah, experienced SpaceX engineers. Anna writes checklist procedures for contingency operations for the Dragon capsule, and then Sarah has taught every single NASA astronaut who has flown on the Dragon capsule. So I think what this experience has taught me is the reliance upon working together as a team. First, coming to the table, understanding what strengths and weaknesses, more importantly, what weaknesses you have and what you're bringing to the fight. And then it's about forming that crew through these experiences, through our training, to understand what roles we each play in order to achieve our ultimate goal is a successful, safe mission. So reliance upon each other, and that gets back to the humility and understanding your limitations, because to think that we can do it alone is foolish. It's certainly a team effort, and it's not only our crew of 4. We have behind the scenes a Polaris team of 7-8 individuals who are day in and day out working on the bigger picture stuff, philanthropy, the training schedule, the communications and the media plan coming up for the launch itself. And then obviously you got what I talked about before is the SpaceX family. What those engineers are able to accomplish, and take our suit as a simple example. They've flown with the IVA suit for several years now, and then in a very short period, it's been just about a year, they took the IVA suit as a baseline and developed their prototype EVA suit that we're going to use on our mission. And to think they did it in less than a year on a fraction of the budget that, historically you look at some of the other suits flown for EVAs, it's billion-dollar programs and decades to develop. And I have full faith and confidence in the technology they're developing. We put them on every time we go out there for training. We're testing, and they don't sleep. They are relentless in their pursuit of a successful mission, and that starts with the safety of this technology that they're developing.
Amazing. Before we get into the mission, you said a couple of moments ago that space was new to you. So you were not a pilot who wanted to be an astronaut. You were a pilot, and you thought that you had to reach as high, and space came and found you. Correct?
It did. So very non-traditional. You would think flying fighter jets. It's pretty traditional when you look back in the history of space flight, space exploration with Mercury and Gemini and Apollo, all the test pilots. My flying experience was certainly part of of the recipe of where I'm at. But the non-traditional piece is I was a struggler academically growing up. I was a C and D type student, focused on sports more than anything. I only got into college based on my running resume, be able to run cross country and track. Thankfully, that happened, and I was blessed to have this experience. I got exposed to what's called outdoor education at the University of New Hampshire. So it's a degree that's focused on experiential learning. So the outdoor piece, I took classes like scuba diving, rock climbing, winter mountaineering, whitewater rafting, Nordic skiing, but it was all based on learning a skill set through experiential learning. And it just clicked with me. Lectures the traditional way, hours and hours of retention of information, data, sometimes useless. It just didn't work for me. I didn't have the motivation nor desire nor the determination. But I did with the outdoor education. So that kind of got me through, got my degree. I was part of the ROTC program. So that's kind of the door that led to flying fighters. I had one opportunity in ROTC to go in an incentive flight in the backseat of a tanker. And I watched some F-16s get refueled, got deathly airsick. But it was enough of a spark to see those F-16s get refueled that I'm like, I want to do that. So I set my goal. I got over the air sickness. I got over my fear of heights. I got over the challenges of academics, and I got my pilot slot with the Air Force when I kicked that off, and then I started flying and spent 20 years doing that. I thought that was kind of the apex of my aviation aerospace career. I always had a passion for space. I thought it was amazing. I grew up in the Right Stuff era when the movie came out in the 80s. By far my favorite movie. But I never thought it was possible. It was the test pilots. It was the ones with physics and aerospace engineering degrees, PhDs. Never thought it possible until, while I was on the Thunderbirds, I met Jared Isaacman, who was an avid pilot as well, started a demo team in the civilian sector. And that friendship developed over time. I worked for him for several years before he started this whole space venture with Inspiration 4.
Inspiration 4 came at a time where there was a lot of negative press about billionaires and going out for themselves. And within 1 month, it was William Shatner and then Inspiration 4 that really brought it down to why we were doing this. I think Jared did an absolute amazing job at capturing what it can be, the philanthropy side aspects, these different characters, with Cyan and Chris and Haley, but really doing an amazing job. And you were right at the center. You were a mission director, correct?
I was. And, that was certainly the catalyst for what we're doing now. He could have easily selected 3 of his buddies to go along with him and gone on this venture, one and done. That was a great experience and had some fun. But from the very, very beginning, he wanted to make it bigger than himself, and he wanted to knock down those doors and expand space exploration for all. So from the very beginning, it was all about a partnership, because his quest was not only to explore space, but to make life better here back on Earth. And what better partner than to select St. Jude to go along with us? And that was a big part of my role, is just to work with the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, figure out every single possible way we could raise awareness and raise funds for their causes. Because Jared's, philanthropic efforts go further back than just St. Jude. He did a lot of support for Make-A-Wish. during his days in the air show industry. And it's even further back when he did his world record attempts with business jets around the world. But he thought, let's address the problem at the root. Instead of granting wishes, let's work to find a cure so we don't have to grant as many wishes. And I won't lie, it was a challenging year for sure. It was tough on the families. I've never worked harder in my life traveling because we were just trying to figure it out. What were we going to do? We wanted to make it, do some type of random selection. That's where we did the whole partner with St. Jude and gave one seat to them. So that selection was up to St. Jude. We did the sweepstakes, and then we did the entrepreneur contest. And that vision stayed at the forefront through that entire journey. So most of my effort was focused on St. Jude, and then helping the crew get to and from the training. And then in a very short, I think the announcement was in February, and then the mission launched in September. And they had to get fitted for suits and do some training before that. So we couldn't write a better story for that experience. And based on what we were able to accomplish with Inspiration 4 was the spark that led us down the Polaris program conversation and eventual partnership with SpaceX.
So you were involved really at the center of it, but more on the logistics side, and now you're really at the center of it, part of the team. What is Polaris? What is the timeline? What is you're looking to achieve and get out of this mission?
So the Polaris program is up to 3 space flights. The idea behind the vision was to make it more operational, to identify some of the developmental technology challenges that we're going to face as we venture further and out and longer duration space flights. Similar to what, there's so many accomplishments with NASA, and Jared says it quite often. We're truly standing on the shoulders of giants based on those accomplishments, and we would never be where we're at without those achievements. And one of those achievements is the Gemini program. It more or less bridged the gap between initial spaceflight with Project Mercury and then going to the moon with the Apollo program. And they, in the mid-'60s, they identified some of those challenges and obstacles to get to the moon. So they were able to accomplish the first docking, the first spacewalk, multi-crew, longer durations. And we kind of wanted to mimic that in a very small way as SpaceX makes the transition from the F9 to Starship. So the idea behind our 3 missions, the first 2 will be on Falcon 9 Dragon capsule. And then the third mission, Jared will command the first crewed Starship mission a couple years down the road when they're ready for that. But as far as Polaris Dawn, the first mission, Jared's commander, I'm the pilot, and then Sarah and Anna make up the mission specialist, and then Anna's also the medical officer. We have 4 primary pillars for our mission. The first is complete the first commercial spacewalk. So we'll do an EVA during this mission. We also are looking to push the envelope on the altitude. So we're striving for right around 1,400 kilometers. Gemini 11 back in 1966 set the record for Earth orbit. Apollo, obviously a completely different story, but Gemini 11 went to 1,368 kilometers. So we want to venture out there and continue to gather as much information as we possibly can. So as most people know, that's the lower portions of the Van Allen belt. Slightly higher radiation levels. So some of our experiments of science and research are focused on testing and understanding those exposures to the radiation. And then the third objective is to accomplish the first testing of Starlink from space. So again, communication is going to be one of the big challenges, and more reliance upon crew and not necessarily automated systems, with those delays in connectivity, the latency that we experience now. Hopefully we can improve upon that. But still, when you talk about venturing to Mars, it's those durations are going to have a direct impact on one's ability to execute. And then lastly, we have the 40 science and research experiments that we have lined up. And again, those are to identify some challenges. We're doing certain experiments that address spaceflight associated neuroocular syndrome, the increase in pressure in the cerebral spinal fluid, and that how that can have a direct impact on your vision, your cognitive functioning. We don't know much about it, and we certainly need to learn a lot more before we start heading out. Radiation is another area that we're interested in. We're doing a lot of ultrasound scans. Some of these elements are, how are we going to address healthcare concerns on these longer durations? So that's why we're gonna do some of these ultrasounds. We're testing up a glucose monitor from space. There's a whole list of experiments, but that's been a fun part, working with these universities, these institutions, hospitals, organizations, because they're certainly passionate about what they're doing. And some of these experiments, to be able to have those limited opportunities to be exposed to, whether it's a vacuum or it's a microgravity, that can be very expensive. The concept behind our mission is it's completely free. We just need to have experiments that benefit and move the needle as we progress. So those are the 4 primary objectives. Right now, we're scheduled to launch this summer, and we're getting down to a couple months of training, and everything's looking good.
Exciting. I was so last year I spent some time up in the Arctic and Antarctica, and every time I can't stop but really reminding myself of the hardship of exploration back in the days, without instruments. If you wanted to know something, you had to go over there and figure it out by yourself. And in the process, it was a lot of the human cost was super high. And, just crossing the Atlantic on a sail ship, scurvy, malaria. I mean, thousands and millions of people died in the process of the quest of knowledge. Reading stories of the English expedition down in Antarctica, spending the winter just to go and get the weather, and almost dying of carbon monoxide on so many times. And now today we have a drone on Mars. We have rovers on Mars. We have a capacity now to explore minus the severity of the human cost. And you're explaining to me everything that you are preparing yourself, and the knowledge, the awareness of how much we need to learn and test before we go, so that we don't go through these. We don't go through these tragedies. There will be new tragedies, but at the same time, I think that the extreme of the human cost in the exploration will never be what we've experienced. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Small tangent. Did you? What would you do down in Antarctica?
Oh, so it couldn't be more different than the early explorers. I was on Seaborn Venture, which is a new luxurious expedition ship. And, even just 5 to 10 years ago, these kind of experiences were only reserved for the hardcore, from the ones who would just want to ride it, like dry. But now you have, so Venture, this new ship, expedition ship, first of all, has the software, the AI, the stabilizers. It's no more the propeller shaft, the shaft that turns the propellers. It's all these giant azipods that they call. So it's a giant propellers that can face. First of all, it faces forward, so it's pulling the ship, no more pushing the ship. So much more efficient. And these are continuously doing micro adjustment to keep the ship, as possible, stable as possible, so that you cruise the Drake Passage and you got, a 20 feet, 30 feet swell, and you're still riding, and you're in a restaurant drinking a glass of champagne, and you're like, this is insane. But the humility of being reminded of how far we've come, so that we can expand and extend those experiences to people who not necessarily would want to really rough it out and just like have, just for the sake of it. That someone who is either 50 years old or 75, or even we had some like 98 years old who came down and got to see, it's not cheap, but more and more gradually, that's the curve of accessibility, and a space is going to follow the same thing.
Absolutely. So we actually went down to Antarctica 2020, so a couple years back. We spent New Year's Eve up on top of Mount Benson Massif, climbing the peak down there. But in a similar fashion, you're taking a jet down there, and you do have basic infrastructure to be able to survive and sustain with heat, and it's certainly nowhere in the same ballpark as what those pioneers did, only decades ago, to be able to explore our planet, let alone what's out there. But I think that's what we're doing right now with the space industry and companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin. It's incremental risk, very calculated. Just seeing how SpaceX functions, engineers come up and develop these technologies and these paths forward, the mission profile that we're going to execute. We can't afford to have a significant setback. It's just the new era that we live in, relative to what those pioneers experienced back in the day, where they were willing to risk it all. We can't afford to do that. It's got to be very calculated and incremental, and that's I think we're doing it right. Example is just the development of the suit, and that's the reason why we've had some of these delays, is just working through some of the challenges. And every time they come up with a solution to a challenge, it's very reassuring, and safety continues to be a top priority. And it has to be, because the public can't handle a catastrophe or a significant setback. It would delay our advancement for years to come. So I think we're doing it right. And as long as we keep that in the forefront, we'll continue the progression the way it has been going.
I'm sure you are. It was there was something that was running in the back of my mind, because we just came back from the Caribbean, and totally out of nowhere, I was on the ferry and I looked up. It was dark. The sun had come down, and I look up and I see this plume, like almost northern light, but I was not expecting it. So I didn't know what it was until I realized that it was the SpaceX launch all the way down to St. Martin. And I found myself totally straight back to Gattaca. when he's looking up, and just, this is his connection to dream and understanding, is like, this is where we're going. And now more and more into this world, we're going to have people around the world experiencing this connection to these places where we're going. And if there's one thing that I've come talking to, all these pioneers and experts, and even myself, what I've done in my life, the our sense of limitation today is not an indicator of what can and can't be done, because we're constantly pushing, recreating our reality. And if the past is one big lesson, is that whatever we thought we couldn't do today is taken for granted. Now we look at our limitations like, no, this is going to be impossible. In 50 years, 100 years from now, we're going to look back at our time, and it's going to be, they were like limited in what they thought was possible. And every day you're talking about the people at SpaceX that are working continuously trying to fix these issues. This is one of the reasons why I'm not a doom and gloom about where we are today as a species. I see so many people who wake up in the morning obsessed at trying to find solutions so that we can move forward and be a better civilization, a better society, and going and continuing expanding those boundaries. I cannot but be hopeful, not naive. I think there's a big difference between being naive and understanding our capacity to fix and to rise in the worst of times. But that's the beauty of the human species. Scott, we started with your 3 words that capture the essence of space, but I do want to get 3 words with all your experience. What would be your 3 words of wisdom?
3 words of wisdom. I would say the first one, I'll piggyback on our first space flight with Inspiration 4. I think inspiration is critical for progress. We all have passions, and thankfully the engineers at SpaceX, that passion, that inspiration is advancement in space exploration. And I think that's what, having that inspiration is what helps us take on the daily challenges, which ultimately lead to longer, bigger accomplishments over time, and that advancement that you're referring to. Just looking at Starship, I would have never dreamed humans could create a vehicle that's going to hold 100, 150 passengers, and it's going to launch 3 times a day. And that dream, that vision is not too far away. And it is certainly a possibility and a reality. If you had asked any of us 10, 20, 30 years ago, probably only one human on Earth, Elon, that would have said, yes, it's going to be a reality. But thankfully, people like the engineers at SpaceX have that vision, have that passion, have that inspiration. Vision, I think, would be another one. It took the vision of all those pioneers that we've discussed over the last hour to be able to venture beyond their comfort zones and take those risks. Risks that we certainly view as potentially too risky. But thankfully, they had the vision and that passion to be able to explore and give it a shot, so we can venture out on this planet itself. And then third, commitment. That's a good one. We need to stay committed to the visions that we have in order to achieve the goals that they want to pursue. We have to have that level of commitment and people willing to take those risks to be able to continue this journey of space exploration.
Even just, I would say 5 years ago, if someone had asked me if I want to live until 150 years old, I would be like, nah. I think that 100 on this planet is long enough. And now, someone offered me would I live until for 400 years, I would be like, yes. Even if I'm gonna be like stuck in the bed. I just feel that like we're opening the door to an entire new era of redefining what is the human experience. And the next 50 or 100 years, 150 years, are going to totally revolutionize our understanding of life. And, I've compared it often when, life on Earth went from single cell to multi-cell. It led to the Cambrian evolution, an explosion in evolution. And now we're about to go from a single planet to multi-planet. And that leap again is going to totally create a giant leap in evolution. So can't wait to see. And you're at the front, you're at the forefront of it. And I can't wait to see you wave goodbye as you go up into space, Scott.
Well, and that's what we want to do, is bring along the public. That's why we're doing the first Starlink test from space. Hopefully I can FaceTime people. Connectivity is certainly not there yet, but hopefully we can break down one of those barriers to continue this advancement.
Well, I'll be right there, and I'll be waving and waiting for you, your FaceTime.
Awesome.
Scott, thank you so very much.
Thank you very much as well.